our local historical societies do a lot of work, are hard at work right now, recording that history so we can learn from it later. And joining us now from the Greater West Bloomfield Historical Society is Cory Taylor. She is their Office and Activities Coordinator. Cory, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate having you on. How are you? How's the team over at the Greater West Bloomfield Historical Society?
We're hanging in there, staying busy, definitely. Now that we can be back in the museum, we're finishing up some of the projects we started back in March, getting the museum ready to hopefully welcome visitors again next year. So yeah, we're staying busy.
So with that, you mentioned that working to bring visitors back next year. While the pandemic has been going on, how has the Historical Society continued to provide its service with, as you mentioned, people not going to the museum on Orchard Lake Road?
Yeah, well, the museum, was only open one day a week. So, and for private appointments and private groups, but mostly for the general public, it was just the second Sunday every month. So when we closed, we wanted to make sure that people remembered that we existed, even if we weren't having any events. So we kind of ramped up our social media and email presence. So we've sent out kind of email blasts with local history and different historical type stories multiple times a week and on our social media. And we've kind of cross-posted with the Historical Society of Michigan and the Oakland County Historic and Pioneer Society in Pontiac. So we've kind of been working together with those two groups to kind of make our presence known so that people don't forget that we're here. And we're just starting to kind of get virtual programming up and running. But in terms of people coming back to the museum, we don't see it happening until next year, unfortunately. But it's just because of our size and, we're run all by volunteers and we just think it's safer for everybody if we just keep it virtual for now.
For those that are unfamiliar, what does the Greater West Bloomfield Historical Society and other local historical societies, what do they provide to these local communities?
Well, we function a lot differently than bigger museums like the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn or the Detroit Historical Museum downtown. And, they kind of provide a larger scope of history, locally, nationally, regionally. But your local historical society, because of its size, we try to provide history and outreach to just our local community. So in terms of the Greater West Bloomfield Historical Society, we serve the 4 communities: West Bloomfield, Orchard Lake, Sylvan Lake, and Keego Harbor. And we collect and preserve histories of, people in those communities and just the community history in general. So we try to, like I said, preserve it so that future generations or even people outside of our community can come in to our museum or visit on our website to get some of that historical information that way.
Cory, how do you plan to mark what's going on right now for future generations?
Well, we actually started a Collecting Memories project back in April, specifically for COVID-19 and the class of 2020. Myself and Gina Gregory, the president of the society, and Hannah Dagg, one of the board members, we kind of got together and had this conversation about, what can we do to, collect the stories and the experiences that are happening right now in our communities. And we were kind of inspired by the Historical Society of Michigan, who's doing something similar. But they're doing it for the state of Michigan. And we wanted to make sure that our community members felt like we were, reaching them. So we're collecting anything that people are willing to give us, just stories or photographs, videos, pieces of art, anything like that, that tells their story and their experience of living through the pandemic, whether it's working from home or having to educate your children from home, working with your spouse, and even being home alone. We've gotten a few stories back from people who normally are very social and active in the community, but because of the pandemic and the lockdown, they've had to stay at home. And so it's been very interesting to see the different perspectives and different experiences. We're all kind of living through the same thing, but experienced it from very different, areas on the spectrum. And also, we wanted to hear from the class of 2020 because, graduating from high school and graduating from college, that's a huge accomplishment and a huge thing in your life. And to not be able to experience that last half of the senior year or your last semester of college is heartbreaking to me. I know it is for a lot of other people. And so we want to hear from students also, kind of what they've been doing to deal with the pandemic or what their last part of their senior year has been like. So we definitely want to hear from everybody in the community.
Cory Taylor with us. She is the Office and Activities Coordinator at the Greater West Bloomfield Historical Society. So, Cory, as you're collecting these stories, you're getting them in various forms. You're looking for them in various forms, whether it be some sort of artifacts from this current time or people's stories, especially with all the media that we have access to today. How can people submit their pieces of history, their trinkets of history, to the Greater West Bloomfield Historical Society for the Collecting Memories COVID-19 and Class of 2020 project?
Well, there's a couple different ways you can do it. One is just regular snail mail. You can mail it to the Orchard Lake Museum, or you can drop it off there in the mailbox. The easiest thing and probably the safest thing is to go to our website, and there's an online form and an online link that you can upload your materials to. For physical artifacts, like I said, you can drop them off at the museum, or you can just hang on to them until the museum opens officially to the public. And you can also email them directly to me, which is, my email is just Cory, Cory, at gwbhs.org. So those are the different ways, and all of that information is on our website.
How long are you collecting material? And at the end of this project, what is your goal for how you're going to put it all together? Because I would imagine you're going to be getting materials in so many different formats.
Well, that's the goal, right? That's the hope, that we get a lot of, different stories, different artifacts. At this point, we just want to collect them and preserve them. There's no end date, so you can, continue to submit these stories. We don't know how long this is going to go on, so we don't want to hinder anybody that doesn't feel comfortable right now, from telling their story. So we're collecting it for as long as we can, and we want to preserve those materials. We're starting a collection at the museum, and those will be available to the public at the museum and hopefully eventually online as well. But right now we're just sort of collecting them and keeping them safe.
So this project began in April. It's we're just approaching the month of August now, so I would assume that you've had some submissions come through. So far, what have been some of the more interesting stories that the Historical Society has heard, or one of the more interesting artifacts that have been collected from this historic time that we're living in that the Historical Society is going to be preserving?
Well, we have been getting a variety of stories. It's touched on a lot of different emotions. One of our volunteers emailed me a picture when the golf courses started to open, I think in May or June. And there was a sign that you had to put on your golf cart that said all of the people in this golf cart live together or have quarantined together or something like that. It was like a big yellow hazard sign that they had to put on the cart. So I thought that was amusing, but also a little jarring to me, that we have to post those kinds of things now. But then on the other hand, I got a submission last month from a mother who her children wanted to see their grandparents, but you can't, touch them or anything or hug them. And so they talked through a window. And it was the picture was one of her children had their hand on the window, and one of the grandparents had their hand on the other side of the window. And it was very touching, and also very, sad to me that there's so many people like that who have relationships with their grandparents or even their parents, and that's the only way they can communicate with them. But that picture was beautiful to me, that they still were able to do that. And we've also heard from places of worship. One of the local churches submitted a story and some pictures, and one of their comments was that the main thing that they've discovered during this whole situation is that their church, they've had to completely change all of their services to virtual online meetings, and that's something for them they've never not had an in-person worship for, I think, over 40 years. And so for them to have to change their entire service, it was very different for them. But the one thing that they did find was that the church wasn't just a church within the building itself. It's the community as a whole. And they found that even though they weren't having in-person services, the church community was still in contact with each other and looking out for one another. And they discovered that they didn't need a building to be a church. And for me, that's pretty powerful. I'm not a very religious person, but I found comfort in that there was a larger community, a community within our community that was, kind of watching out for each other and making sure everybody was okay, and delivering meals if need be, or groceries and things like that. So it's a very uplifting kind of collection, even in the midst of some depressing time.
Cory, anything else for us today before we let you go?
Well, we have some virtual events coming up for the rest of the year. There'll be 2 events every month. So just look out for emails and check our website for event postings. But we look forward to seeing everybody. Even though it's virtual, we look forward to seeing everybody.
Well, Cory, we thank you very much for joining us today.
All right. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Cory Taylor, the Office and Activities Coordinator at the Greater West Bloomfield Historical Society, with us on the Oakland County MegaCast.